Hey everybody, Professor Snart checking in here as I log myself into our course. But as we move into Unit 6, and this is one of those units that's actually really easy to accomplish, but is one of maybe the most kind of fundamental skill-based things that we really need to accomplish in terms of English 1102 overall. So I'm just going to click myself in here. So locating secondary sources. So you might have heard that 1102 is sometimes referred to as the research course, which it definitely is, regardless of what kind of essays you're writing. So ours are about literature, but still fundamentally we're working on the skills of research, including locating sources, evaluating them for appropriateness, integrating them smoothly into an essay, then doing like a works cited page. So all of that kind of stuff really starts here with us, or for us, in terms of Unit 6, which is all about locating secondary sources. And so I'll repeat myself, especially as we get closer to essays that involve sources, but this is one of the most important just rules for our class, is that because the focus is so heavy in terms of the research part for 1102, it's absolutely imperative that you understand that when we use secondary sources, first of all, a secondary source is not a primary source, so you have to understand the difference between those two things. And then a secondary source for us, as is explained in this assignment here, is never going to be general website material. So you're always going to be using the COD databases or appropriate print sources. And for us, an appropriate or a relevant source, secondary source, is going to be one that is a direct discussion of the primary text. In other words, if you're writing a short or an essay on the short story Araby, which is one of the short stories we're reading for Unit 6 here, an appropriate secondary source would be a database article about the short story Araby. It might discuss characters or themes or give a plot overview, any of that stuff, but it's a direct discussion of the short story. So that story happens to deal with a boy's first crush on a girl. And so while thematically something about child psychology or child development that might be thematically related, it's not an appropriate source for our purposes because it's not a direct discussion of the short story that you yourself are also writing about. And so it might seem like a fairly minor part of what we're doing here, or at least a fairly simple one as far as Unit 6 goes. But any serious mistakes in terms of incorrect number of sources in an essay, incorrect type, like you've used just web material, irrelevant sources, in other words, ones that are just kind of generally thematically related and not actual direct discussions of the primary texts, and then, of course, serious problems with the works cited page, any of that stuff, while it might just be one thing out of many that goes to constitute an essay, any mistakes like that really, really seriously affect your grade. And in fact, once we get to the final essay, if there are still problems with sources, putting the works cited together, that kind of stuff, you're unlikely to receive a passing grade just because this is probably the most fundamental practical skill that we're learning, or that you have to learn and then show me that you've learned and can apply for English 1102. So there's really, it's kind of cut and dry. It's either correct or it's not correct, and that has a pretty serious effect on your grade. So the Unit 6 assignment here is very straightforward and, like I said, relatively simple, but it feeds into or starts to develop one of the most important or fundamental skills that we'll be developing and continuing to implement in our essays for English 1102, the research course. So it's really, really important that you get clear in your mind what's a primary source, what's secondary, what kind of source can you use for a secondary source. So again, no web stuff, no just generally related thematic material. It has to all be from a database, an appropriate print source, or like a book maybe, and of course a discussion, a critical discussion of the primary text that you're actually writing about. So by all means, if you have any questions, or if you're confused at all, certainly be in touch with me now so that you're not having to make guesses about this, when it really counts in those later essays, especially the final essay. So MLA citation or anything that's research related really takes on pretty heavy weight for our class. The other thing I want to remind you is just the basic, be sure you're reading the directions. Some people are doing the right sort of amount of work when it's assigned, but they don't seem to have read the directions or read the announcement section. That's just like, that's part of the class. So be sure you're reading those directions so that the work that you're doing isn't just the right page length, but is actually the right work. So in many ways, it's like getting the assignment to write a paper in history, but you write one about something totally different, and it's the right number of words and uses the right sources, but it doesn't fulfill the assignment, so you don't get credit or full credit for it. So just be sure you're reading directions carefully, because that's pretty fundamental to success in a course like ours or any online course, because just about all the interaction we have is through the course itself and materials in the course. We have these little video check-ins, but that's all of 5 or 6 minutes at this point. Okay, so keep on track here as we keep moving through the course, and again, be in touch if you have any questions, especially if it's anything research or source related, because that's a really fundamental part of our 1102 class.